Today we're going to learn how to create and display a table view in code. Most tutorials you'll find for iOS out there on the internet show you how to create table views using Interface Builder inside of storyboards or zip files. And instead what we're going to do here is we're going to do it all in code, programmatically, as people say. And the value of that will probably become more clear over time. But for now, you can say at the very least that it gives you a much clearer sense of how all the mechanics of an iOS application actually work. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is we need to declare our table view inside of our view controller. And to do that, we just go ahead and initialize it as a member variable inside of our view controller. And now we need to set a number of properties on it. And the first property we're going to set is the frame of the table view. And the frame controls its overall size. And we're going to initialize the frame to be the same size as the bounds of our view. And if you want to understand more about what exactly that means, you can read the accompanying tutorial on quickbytes.io. Next, we'll go ahead and set an auto-resizing mask for the table view. This means that when the table view, or when the view controller changes size, the table view follows suit. The next thing we need to do is set the data source to self and the delegate to self. And that will mean that the table view requests data from our view controller, and that it also requests, or that it sends messages about row clicks and the like back to our table view. And you'll see that we're getting errors here. We'll deal with those in just a second. The last thing we need to do is we need to add our table view to the view controller. And we do that by calling add subview on our view controller's view. All right, so let's go ahead and fix the problem we have here. Whoops. And you'll see that occasionally the Swift compiler, or the Xcode's attempts to fix our problems give us fixes like this. This is sort of useless. Casting self to a UI table view delegate is just a silly way to solve this problem when we can do it by properly declaring that our view controller is both a UI table view data source and UI table view delegate at the class level. So now that we have done that, let's try building. And you'll see, whoops, we get an error. View controller does not conform to protocol UI table view data source. Let's go ahead and see what we might have to do to fix that. If we right click on UI table view data source, you'll see this option here called jump to definition. And this will show all of the methods that make up the UI table view data source protocol. And you'll note that most of these have the keyword optional in front of them, and there are two that don't. The two that do not have the keyword optional are required. So we can go ahead and we can copy these, and we can jump back to our view controller and then paste them in. There's a million ways to do this, but this is the way that I personally am most fond of. So we'll go ahead and add in those definitions. And next, number of rows in section, I'm going to return a value of 20 from, and there's nothing special about 20. It's just, it will mean that we'll create enough rows for the table view's content size to be greater than the screen size, and that'll allow us to see that the table view will scroll. And last but certainly not least, we need to create a table view cell. And we do that by initially trying to dequeue a reusable cell from our table view. And note that I'm using dequeue reusable cell with identifier and not the similarly named with identifier index path method. And we'll get into the reasons for that later on, but for now just make sure that you use this method. Otherwise you'll get some strange errors. And we'll go ahead and we'll set our identifier to be just the raw string identifier. We'll change that in a second for reasons I'll explain. And then we check to see if our cell is nil. And if our cell is nil, then we have to create a new one. We do that by calling the init method and passing a style of default and the same reuse identifier. And you'll notice that I'm passing in these raw strings as the reuse identifier. And this is a little risky in some respects. It's entirely possible that I might mistype identifier or something else along those lines, which would mean that we'd actually end up creating more cells than we necessarily want. And so it's a good matter of proper code hygiene to instead use variables in place of raw strings. And so I'm going to create a static cell identifier outside of the method here. And I will, oops, there we go. I'm going to create a static cell identifier, and I will reuse it in both of these places here so that we don't have to worry about mistyping anything. Now, instead of finding out at application runtime that I've messed something up, instead the compiler will yell at me if I mistype something. As you can see here, if I try to mistype cell identifier, it'll complain that view controller has no members named that, and I can instead automatically fix it. Yay. So next up, let's go ahead and put some text into our table view cell. And for that, we're going to use our index path parameter here. And we'll use its description, which will just print the numerical value of the row as a string. And then last but not least, we have to go ahead and return our cell. And we'll try building, and it will succeed. Terrific, and let's go ahead and run it. And you can see we started up in landscape here, just because that's the orientation that I had the simulator in before. And we have 20 rows. That's exciting. Let's try rotating. And you'll see that the table view properly resizes itself when the device rotates, and that's because of that auto resizing mask that we set up earlier. Terrific. So one last thing we want to do is make the table view respond to taps. We haven't done that yet. So let's go back to Xcode. And we will implement a table view delegate method. And the table view delegate method, we can see all those. Actually, let's jump to the definition by using Control-Command-J. The table view delegate method that we want is did select row at index path, which you can see down here. And instead of implementing this by copying and pasting this time, I'm going to rely upon Xcode's awesome auto-completion support. Yep, and you'll see there it is at the very top. I just typed in table view did, and now I can hit return, and it fills it in for me. And so this method is going to be called when the table view detects a tap in one of its rows. And the reason for that is because I originally created I told the table view that that this view controller was going to be its delegate. And so as a result of that, the table view is going to receive calls for methods like didSelectRow. So let's go ahead and we'll display an alert when our clicks are received. Click. And we need to add a button to our alert controller. And we will just call it dismiss, and we will say that it is default style and it does not need a handler. Terrific. Now we can, I always confuse those for some reason. I've been doing this for 10 years and I still confuse these. We will present our alert controller. Since it is just a view controller in its own right, if you go ahead and you look at its definition under the hood, you'll see that alert controller is a view controller, which means that you can present it or show it as you would any other view controller. So now if we go ahead and run this again, and try tapping on one of these rows, hooray, we get a click. But you'll see that these rows are still showing up as gray after tapping, and I'd love to get rid of that. So let's go ahead and fix that. I think it would be most fun to make sure that the cell is not deselected until after the completion handler runs. So let's go ahead and, oops, come on, there we go. Let's go ahead and deselect the row that we just selected when the alert is presented on screen. Let's try that. Yep, and you'll see that after the row finishes I'm sorry, after the alert controller finishes appearing on screen, that the row is deselected. But that does look a little weird, so let's go ahead and move that out instead. We do need to put this completion parameter back as nil, and try running again. And let's see what happens. Fantastic, look at that. So we're all done. So just to recap, what we've done here is we've filled in a view controller with a new table view, and we've populated the table view with 20 rows, and we've added a tap handler to detect taps on our table view. Congratulations on creating your first table view.